You have done everything right. You wake before the sun. You stay long after others leave. You have sacrificed weekends and holidays and quiet dinners with the people you love. You have given your body, your sleep, your peace of mind. And still, somehow, impossibly, maddeningly, you watch others pass you by. People who seem to work half as hard. People who leave early and laugh easily and never carry the same weight you do. And late at night, when the exhaustion settles into your bones like cold water, a question rises in your chest that you are almost afraid to ask. What am I doing wrong? This is a story about that question. It is a story about a farmer named Elias who believed, with all his heart, that the answer to every problem was simply to work harder. And it is a story about how that belief nearly destroyed him. Elias grew up in a small valley where the soil was rich and the seasons were predictable. His father had been a farmer, his grandfather too. And from the time he was old enough to hold a tool, Elias learned one lesson above all others. The man who works the hardest wins. It was never spoken as advice. It was spoken as truth, as natural law, like gravity or the turning of the earth. If your crops fail, you did not work hard enough. If your neighbor outproduces you, he simply wanted it more. Suffering was the currency of success, and Elias intended to be wealthy, so he built his life around labor. He woke at 4 in the morning and worked until he could no longer see his hands in front of his face. He tilled more land than his body could handle. He planted more crops than he could tend. He said yes to every opportunity, took on every task, believing that volume was the same as value, and for a while it seemed to work. His farm grew, his reputation grew. People in the village spoke of Elias as the hardest working man they had ever seen. And he wore that title like a medal, even as his knees began to ache and his back began to curve, and his wife began to look at him with something that was no longer admiration, but concern. There was another farmer in the valley. His name was Thomas. He lived on the adjacent land, and by every measure Elias understood, Thomas should have been a failure. He did not wake before dawn. He did not work until collapse. Some days, Elias would look across the fence and see Thomas sitting beneath a tree in the middle of the afternoon, reading, or simply watching the clouds move across the sky. It was infuriating. It was offensive. How dare he rest while Elias bled for every grain? And yet, Thomas's crops were somehow fuller, his harvests somehow larger, his animals somehow healthier, his fences somehow straighter. And every year, when the merchants came through the valley to buy produce, they paid Thomas more. They praised his quality. They returned to him first. Elias told himself it was luck. He told himself Thomas had better soil, better seeds, some invisible advantage that explained the gap. He told himself that eventually, if he just worked harder, he would catch up. So he worked harder. He slept less. He pushed his body past every reasonable limit. He stopped attending village gatherings. He stopped sitting down for meals with his wife. He stopped playing with his children in the evenings, because there was always more work to be done. And the gap did not close. It widened. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that goes beyond the physical. It is the exhaustion of a soul that has given everything and received nothing in return. It is the exhaustion of watching your sacrifice amount to less than someone else's ease. Elias felt this exhaustion like a sickness. It lived in his chest. It colored his vision. He became irritable, then angry, then hollow. His wife tried to reach him, but he had no space left for tenderness. His children learned to stay quiet around him, to become small, because their father had become a stranger who only knew how to work. And still, he did not stop. because stopping would mean admitting that something was wrong. Stopping would mean questioning the only truth he had ever known. If hard work was the answer, then he simply had not worked hard enough yet. The answer was always more hours, more sweat, more pain. The math had to work eventually. It had to. It was autumn when Elias collapsed. He was in the far field, harvesting alone, when his vision went white and his legs simply stopped holding him. He lay in the dirt for a long time, staring up at a sky he had not really looked at in years. And in that stillness, that forced and frightening stillness, something cracked open inside him. He was not building a life. He was destroying one. He had traded his health for labor, his family for productivity, his peace for the illusion of progress, and he had nothing to show for it. Nothing but a body that was failing and a farm that still could not match his neighbors. When he finally made it home that night, moving slowly, holding his ribs where something felt broken, his wife did not scold him. She simply looked at him with tired eyes and said, "This cannot continue." And for the first time in his adult life, Elias agreed. The next morning, against every instinct he had, Elias walked to Thomas's farm. It was the hardest walk of his life, harder than any day of labor, because it required something that exhausted people rarely have left to give. It required humility. Thomas was sitting on his porch when Elias arrived, a cup of tea in his hand, watching the morning light move across his fields. He did not seem surprised to see his neighbor. He simply gestured to an empty chair beside him and waited. Elias sat down. He did not know how to begin, so he simply told the truth. "I am killing myself," he said, "and I am still falling behind. I work twice the hours you do. I try twice as hard, and every year you outproduce me. I need to know how. I need to know what I am missing." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Elias would never forget. "You are not missing effort, Elias. You are missing thinking. You have spent so many years swinging your axe that you have never stopped to sharpen it." Thomas began to explain. He spoke slowly, not with arrogance, but with the patience of someone who had learned these lessons through his own failures long ago. He told Elias that when he first started farming, he too believed that more hours meant more results. He too had worked himself to the bone, spreading his energy across every possible task, saying yes to everything, resting never. And he too had watched his farm stagnate while his body deteriorated. The turning point came when Thomas realized something that seemed almost too simple to be true. Not all work is equal. An hour spent on the right task can be worth more than a week spent on the wrong one. And most people, Thomas said, spend their lives on the wrong tasks. They stay busy so they can feel productive. They confuse motion with progress, activity with achievement. They work hard on things that do not matter and wonder why their lives do not change. Thomas had done something radical. He had stopped. He had stepped back from his farm and asked a question that Elias had never thought to ask. Of all the things I could be doing, which few will actually make a difference? He discovered that 80% of his results came from 20% of his efforts. A small number of crops were profitable. A small number of practices actually improved yield. A small number of relationships actually led to sales. Everything else was noise. So Thomas made a decision that terrified him at first. He cut the noise. He stopped growing crops that took more than they gave. He stopped maintaining equipment that was not essential. He stopped attending every market and chasing every opportunity. Instead, he focused. He put his energy into the few things that actually moved the needle. And something remarkable happened. His results improved. His stress decreased. He had time to think, to plan, to rest. And that rest, Thomas explained, was not laziness. It was strategy. A tired mind makes poor decisions. A rested mind sees clearly. Sleep is not the opposite of productivity. It is the foundation of it. Elias listened with a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that there might be another way. Grief for all the years he had lost. All the pain he had caused himself and his family in service of a belief that was never true. Thomas continued. He spoke of systems. He explained that he did not rely on willpower or motivation to run his farm. He had built structures, routines, processes that did the thinking for him. Each morning, he knew exactly what needed to be done because he had designed his days in advance. He did not wake up and ask, "What should I do today?" He woke up and followed a plan that his rested, clear-thinking self had created. This freed his mind from constant decision-making, which Thomas described as a hidden tax that drained energy throughout the day. The fewer choices he had to make about small things, the more energy he had for the things that mattered. He also spoke of leverage, not the financial kind, but the strategic kind, finding ways to make effort multiply, investing time once in something that pays back repeatedly, planting an orchard instead of an annual crop, building a relationship with a merchant who returns year after year instead of chasing new buyers constantly, writing down what he learned so he did not have to relearn it. Thomas did not work harder than Elias. He had simply arranged his life so that his work worked harder for him. Elias returned home that day with his mind spinning. The next weeks were strange. For the first time in decades, he did not throw himself into labor immediately upon waking. Instead, he sat. He thought. He looked at his farm not as a series of tasks to complete, but as a system to understand. He asked himself Thomas's question. Of all the things I do, which actually matter? The answer was painful. Most of what filled his days was habitual, not essential. He planted crops his grandfather had planted, not because they were profitable, but because that was what he knew. He maintained routines that no longer served him because change felt like failure. He said yes to every request from neighbors and merchants because saying no felt like weakness. He had built a prison of busyness and called it virtue. Slowly, painfully, Elias began to dismantle it. He stopped growing 2 crops entirely and focused his energy on the 3 that actually sold well. He let go of the distant field that took hours to reach and yielded little. He established set times for work, and more importantly, set times for rest. He sat with his wife in the evenings. He played with his children. He slept. The guilt was almost unbearable at first. Every moment of stillness felt like theft, but as the weeks passed, something shifted. His mind became clearer. He saw solutions to problems that had plagued him for years. He made better decisions, and slowly, impossibly, his farm began to improve. It was not immediate. There was no dramatic overnight transformation. Real change, Elias learned, was quiet. It accumulated in small moments, invisible at first, then undeniable. By the following harvest, his yields had increased despite working fewer hours. His costs had decreased because he was no longer wasting resources on things that did not matter. His body felt lighter. His wife smiled at him again. His children sought him out instead of avoiding him. And for the first time in his adult life, Elias did not dread the morning. He understood now what he had been doing wrong all those years. He had confused effort with effectiveness. He had believed that struggle was proof of progress, that pain was the price of success. But struggle is often just struggle. Pain is often just pain. The goal is not to suffer the most. The goal is to build a life that works. And sometimes that requires working less, but thinking more. It requires stepping back before you can move forward. It requires the courage to stop swinging a dull axe and take the time to sharpen it, even when everyone around you keeps swinging. There is a particular kind of wisdom that only comes from exhaustion. It is the wisdom of someone who has tried the hard way and finally admitted that there must be another path. Elias carried this wisdom with him for the rest of his life. He never became the richest farmer in the valley. That was never the point. But he became something more valuable. He became a farmer who was present for his family, healthy in his body, and clear in his mind. He became a man who worked with intention instead of desperation. He learned that rest was not a reward for productivity, but a requirement for it. He learned that saying no to the unimportant was the only way to say yes to what mattered. He learned that the people who seem to achieve effortlessly have often simply done the invisible work of thinking first. And every year, when new farmers arrived in the valley, burning with the same desperate energy Elias once had, he would invite them to sit with him beneath the tree he had planted in his yard. He would pour them tea, and he would tell them the story, not to discourage them from working hard, but to save them from the lie he had believed for so long. The lie that more is always better, that exhaustion is proof of worth, that the one who suffers most wins. These are the beliefs of people who have never stopped to ask if their ladder is leaning against the right wall. These are the beliefs that turn passionate people into hollow ones, that transform dreams into burdens, that take the brightest lights and slowly extinguish them in the name of productivity. You have worked so hard, you have given so much, and if you are tired, truly tired, in the deep and soul-level way that never seems to heal, then perhaps it is time to stop glorifying the exhaustion and start questioning the approach. Perhaps it is time to ask, not how can I work harder, but what should I stop doing entirely? Perhaps it is time to recognize that being busy is not the same as being effective, that motion is not the same as progress, that the person who runs fastest in the wrong direction only gets more lost. You do not need to work more hours. You need to work the right hours on the right things with enough rest to see clearly what those things are. You need systems that carry you forward even when motivation fades. You need to protect your energy like the finite resource it is. You need to understand that strategy is not the opposite of hard work. It is what makes hard work actually work. The world will always reward those who think before they act, who sharpen their axes before they swing, who have the wisdom to rest so they can see clearly. These people are not lazy. They are intelligent. They have learned the lesson that Elias learned in a field lying on his back, staring at a sky he had forgotten existed. You are not falling behind because you are not working hard enough. You are falling behind because hard work was never the whole answer. The answer is alignment. It is focus. It is rest. It is the courage to do less, but do it better. It is the humility to admit that your strategy might be broken, that your beliefs might be inherited rather than true, that the way you have always done things might be the very thing holding you back. This is not a comfortable realization, but it is a liberating one, because it means the solution is not more pain. It is not more sacrifice. It is not giving up what little remains of your health and relationships and peace. The solution is wisdom, and wisdom begins the moment you set down your dull axe and decide finally that you deserve to stop merely surviving your life and start actually living it. Elias lived many more years after that autumn collapse. He watched his children grow. He sat with his wife on quiet evenings. He became known in the valley not as the hardest working man, but as the wisest. And when people asked him the secret of his transformation, he would smile and say something so simple it almost sounded like a joke. I stopped being proud of how tired I was. I started being proud of how clear I was. And that made all the difference. The trees do not strain to grow. The rivers do not struggle to flow. There is a way of moving through life that is not war but harmony. And finding it does not make you weak. It makes you free.